The words of the lawyer still echoed in my ears when I stepped out of that sterile office into the damp Oregon air. My sisters were inside, already clinking glasses of victory, celebrating their millions. Portia, the queen of private equity, had secured Calder Holdings, while Lark, the glittering ESG consultant, claimed father's investment portfolio. And me, at 58, after 5 years of sleepless nights and feeding tubes, after walking away from my nursing career to sit at father's side until his last breath, I was rewarded with a key. A rusty, salt-eaten key to a decaying lighthouse no one had cared about in decades. "Perfect fit for you, Nia," Portia had whispered, not even bothering to hide her smirk. Lark laughed so hard her diamond earrings shook. "Enjoy your haunted tower." I didn't reply. I simply closed my fist around the key, letting its jagged edge bite into my palm. Father had taught me something long before I became the caretaker. Silence is sharper than any retort. The drive up the coastal highway was bleak, storm clouds gathering over the Pacific like a curtain about to fall. My Honda's wipers screeched against the glass, struggling to keep up. Every mile felt heavier, weighted with 5 years of sacrifice distilled into one mocking inheritance. By the time Winter's Point came into view, I almost laughed. The lighthouse leaned like an old drunk, its paint blistered, its glass shattered. The gulls circled, shrieking as if to mock me too. I sat in the car staring at the ruin, the gift my sisters assumed would finally bury me in irrelevance. But when I stepped out, the ocean wind carried something else. Memory. Father's voice from childhood summers whispering, "A beacon only shines when the storm comes." And something in me knew, this storm was just beginning. The lock on the lighthouse door didn't match the rusty key I'd been handed. I twisted it once, twice nothing. My sisters had laughed at me for even trying, but father had been a planner until the very end. I stepped back, staring at the warped wooden steps. That's when the memory came rushing in me, 8 years old, tripping on the top stair, mother rushing down, father chuckling as he pulled me up. "The place you fall is the place you'll rise again, Nia." I bent low, brushing away moss, and there it was. A small hatch under the stair, the kind of detail you'd miss if you weren't looking with memory. Inside lay a sleek black keycard, impossibly modern compared to the corroded iron prop I'd been mocked with. The scanner by the door blinked red until I swiped. Then green. The heavy steel bolts released with a groan, and the door swung inward, not to a ruin but to something startlingly alive. The inside of Winter's Point was spotless. Fresh wiring hummed faintly. LED strips lit the spiral staircase. On the table in the keeper's quarters sat a sealed envelope and a dust-free flash drive marked only with my name in father's familiar scrawl. My hands shook as I slid the drive into the old laptop father had left. The screen flickered, and then his face filled it, older, frailer, but with eyes burning like the man who had taught me constellations through the glass lens of this very beacon. "If you're watching this, Nia, it means the others dismissed the lighthouse and left it to you." Good, that was always the plan. The true inheritance is here, hidden where only you would think to look. Go to the Fresnel chamber. The code is the date your mother fell on the stairs. What you find there belongs only to you. Use it wisely. The screen went dark. My knees nearly gave way. Father had set me on a path, and the first step had just begun. The spiral stairs groaned under my weight as I climbed, father's words echoing with every step. At the top, the Fresnel chamber loomed, its fractured glass prisms still catching fragments of moonlight. I pressed my palm to the cool brass frame, whispering the date burned into my memory. The night mother had tumbled down the stairs, breaking her wrist but laughing through the pain. The panel clicked. A section of the lens assembly slid aside, revealing a biometric pad glowing faint blue. I hesitated, then pressed my thumb. The mechanism hummed. With a hiss of hydraulics, the entire lens rotated outward like a door, exposing a hidden chamber no larger than a closet. Inside were shelves stacked with waterproof cases, neatly labeled in Father's precise script. The first case contained thin silver wafers, data chips, sealed in resin. Another held carbon credit certificates from a Pacific kelp forest initiative I had never heard of. A third contained contracts tied to something called Blue Ledger, bearing international maritime seals. My breath caught as I scanned the documents. They weren't junk investments. They were power. Exclusive rights to ocean current data harvested from sensors Father had helped design decades ago. Tied to renewable energy, shipping, and climate research, the market value wasn't thousands. It was tens of millions. Tucked between the folders was a leather-bound notebook. Father's handwriting sprawled across the first page. Portia and Lark built their lives on illusions. I dismantled those illusions with care. Their inheritances will wither because they must learn what you already know. Sacrifice has value. But you, Nia, you will carry the torch. Guard these assets, but never hoard them. They are not for vengeance. They are for light. I sank onto the floor, surrounded by wealth hidden in plain sight, laughter bubbling out of me like seawater over rocks. The rusty key had been a decoy. The real key had always been trust. The storm outside the lighthouse had passed, but the storm inside my family was just beginning. My phone buzzed incessantly as I cataloged Father's hidden files. At first, I ignored it. Then I saw the name, Portia. Her voice, once commanding and clipped, now trembled at the edges. Nia, I hate to ask, but could you lend me $50,000? Just a bridge loan. Calder Holdings is experiencing temporary liquidity issues. I almost laughed. Portia, who had once mocked me for clipping coupons during Dad's hospital stays, was begging me for gas money compared to what I now held in my hands. I'm barely getting by with the lighthouse repairs, I told her softly. The silence on the other end was thick, the kind that carried humiliation. Then she whispered, "Right, of course, I shouldn't have asked." 2 days later, it was Lark. Her voice was thinner, manic. "Markets are brutal, Nia. Every green fund I touch is tanking. It's like the world is cursed." She gave a brittle laugh, but I could hear panic beneath it. "Maybe I'll crash at the lighthouse for a few days. Fresh air, you know." The same sister who once sneered that salt air would ruin her skin was now begging to share my groceries. I agreed, keeping my tone even. "You're welcome anytime. The place isn't much, but it's standing." When the call ended, I leaned against the cold stone wall, heart pounding. Father's handwriting echoed in my mind. Their inheritances will wither. They must learn what you already know. And they were learning. Cracks were spreading through their carefully polished lives. Portia's empire was collapsing. Lark's portfolio was rotting. What they didn't know was that I held the lifeboat. The question was, would I let them drown first? Lark showed up at Winter's Point on a Friday evening, her silver SUV coughing smoke like an exhausted animal. She looked nothing like the glossy consultant who used to glide into boardrooms wearing $1,000 heels. Her hair was tied back in a messy knot, her blazer creased from too many days in the same outfit. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "The place looks better than I imagined," she said, stepping cautiously into the lantern room I'd scrubbed spotless. "You've done wonders with it." I handed her a mug of coffee, watching her eyes dart nervously at the walls, the humming power lines, the order Father had left behind. "It's strange, isn't it?" I said lightly. "How clean everything was when I got here, almost like someone had been keeping it ready." Lark's brow furrowed. But Dad he could barely remember his meds by the end. "Maybe," I shrugged, but there were moments, weren't there? Little flashes when he seemed sharper than he let on. Her hands tightened around the mug. "You think he planned this?" I met her eyes but didn't answer. Instead, I set Father's old notebook on the table, closed, letting its weight speak for me. "Sometimes," I said softly, "I wonder if Dad's final choices weren't mistakes at all. Maybe he knew exactly what he was doing. For the first time since she'd arrived, Lark was silent. Her bravado melted, replaced by something raw fear or perhaps the beginning of recognition. She glanced at the lighthouse glass, fractured yet still casting its broken light across the water. "If he did plan this," she whispered, "what does that mean for us?" I stirred the fire, letting the question hang. A seed planted needs silence to grow. The next morning, a black sedan crawled up the gravel road. Portia stepped out in a raincoat too fine for coastal weather, clutching a leather briefcase like a shield. She scanned the lighthouse with narrowed eyes as if it were a hostile witness in one of her boardroom trials. "Nia," she said, forcing a smile, "I thought I'd check on you." And Lark, her gaze swept over her younger sister slouched by the fire in borrowed sweatpants. "You look comfortable." "Don't start," Lark muttered. I poured Portia a cup of coffee just as I had for Lark the night before. "Strange, isn't it? Dad never mentioned this place much in his last years, yet it's in better shape than any of us expected." Portia sat stiffly, cup untouched. "Coincidence? Or calculation," I said, casually flipping Father's notebook open to a page filled with title diagrams and dates. "He left me this. I keep wondering if he wanted us to find more than just walls and rust." Lark shifted uneasily. "She thinks he planned it, Portia, all of it." Portia's mask faltered for half a second before she laughed, brittle. "Father couldn't even balance his checkbook at the end." "Maybe not," I replied evenly. "But do you remember those days when he seemed perfectly lucid? When his eyes were sharper than he let on? What if those weren't lapses of memory at all, but glimpses of a bigger design?" The lantern glass above us fractured the morning light into shards that fell across their faces. Two women who had always thought themselves untouchable, now caught in Father's invisible net. Neither spoke. The silence was heavy, deliberate, exactly the kind of silence Father had taught me to use as a blade, and I could feel it cutting them already. By late afternoon, the horizon had turned the color of bruised steel. The wind picked up, carrying with it the low moan of a coming tempest. Lark stood by the window, hugging herself. Portia checked her phone every 30 seconds, though the signal kept dropping. Then the first spotlight swept across the water. A tugboat, black and branded with the logo of Vex Maritime, crept toward Winter's Point. Behind it, barges carried heavy machinery wrapped in tarps. "They're here for the lighthouse," I said quietly. The front door shook with a fist of thunder. Seconds later, actual fists pounded against it. Mara Vex's voice cut through the storm like a blade. "By order of the Coastal Development Authority, this property is condemned. Vacate immediately." Portia paled. "She can't do that, not legally." "She doesn't care about legal," I said. "She cares about leverage." Lightning flared, illuminating Mara's silhouette through the glass, tall, composed, a predator who'd scented weakness. Her men carried tools to cut locks, chains, anything in their way. Lark's voice cracked. "Nia, we can't fight them. We'll lose everything." I set Father's notebook on the table with deliberate calm. "Maybe that's what he wanted us to see, that everything you thought you had was never really yours to begin with." Portia slammed her fist down. "Enough riddles, Nia. If Dad left something, if he planned something, you need to tell us now. Because if we don't stand together, Mara will gut us all." The walls shuddered as the storm roared in full force, rain lashing the glass. For the first time, the three Calder sisters weren't rivals or strangers. They were cornered animals in the same cage. And Father's silence had driven us exactly here. The pounding on the door grew louder, then stopped. Mara's voice echoed through a bullhorn now, sharp against the howling wind. "Last warning. Abandon the structure before it collapses." Her threat was drowned out by a radio crackle on the desk. It was the Coast Guard channel Father had wired into the lighthouse decades ago. Static, then a frantic voice. Mayday, mayday, trawler Kestrel dead in the water near Winter's Point. Heavy seas, request immediate assistance. Portia and Lark froze. Outside, lightning carved the sky. I slid Father's notebook toward them, flipping to the back where a single line was scrawled in his shaky hand. In the storm, shine. Opening the hidden console beneath the desk, I keyed in the date of Mother's fall, the same code that had opened the Fresnel chamber. The ancient lens above us roared to life, bathing the waves in a brilliant beam. Simultaneously, the terminal blinked, Blue Ledger activated. Data stream public. Across the coast, screens lit up, harbor masters, rescue stations, even fishermen's phones. Father's ocean current models, tide predictions, and live storm mapping poured out free for anyone to use. The effect was immediate. The Coast Guard redirected, using the data to chart a safe path. Smaller boats that had been drifting blind suddenly had guidance. And Mara's tugboat, exposed. Her men cursed as the feed broadcast their illegal encroachment in real time. "They're broadcasting this," Portia whispered. "Everywhere," I said. Father made sure the ledger wasn't just wealth, it was a weapon of truth. Outside, Mara screamed orders, but her voice was lost in the roar of the sea and the blinding sweep of our resurrected beacon. For once, the lighthouse was not just guarding ships. It was putting predators like Mara directly in the spotlight. By dawn, the storm had emptied itself over the Oregon coast. The sea lay bruised and swollen, littered with driftwood and the skeletons of shattered buoys. The lighthouse still stood, its beam fading back to silence. News crews arrived before breakfast, chasing the story of how a forgotten beacon had guided the Coast Guard through the worst gale in a decade. Drones circled, capturing images of Winter's Point glowing defiantly, while Mara Vex's tugboat limped into harbor under federal escort. On the TV in the keeper's quarters, a reporter's voice cut through. "Vex Maritime under investigation for unlawful coastal activity and interference with rescue operations." CEO Mara Vex declined to comment. Lark exhaled shakily, rubbing her temples. "She's finished," just like that. Portia, pale and silent, finally turned toward me. Her eyes were sharper now, stripped of arrogance, sharpened instead by calculation and something else. Fear. "You knew," she said slowly. "You knew there was more here than a rusty tower." I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch until it became unbearable. Father didn't choose by accident. Lark looked at me differently than Portia did. Her voice cracked, not with suspicion, but with desperation. "Nia, if he left you something, if he planned this, you have to tell us. We're drowning out there. You saw it last night." The air inside the lantern room was thick with their need. For the first time, both my sisters were looking at me not as the caretaker, not as the expendable sibling, but as the one who held the map. Father had written it in his notebook. "Guard these assets, but never hoard them. They are not for vengeance. They are for light." I wondered if I was ready to share the light, or if they needed to feel the darkness a little longer. That evening, the three of us sat around the keeper's table, the storm's aftermath still howling faintly through cracks in the stone. Portia kept tapping her briefcase as if it contained answers she couldn't quite reach. Lark gnawed at her nails until they were raw. Both waited for me to break the silence. Instead, I opened Father's notebook again, letting the pages fall where they may. Diagrams of currents, market notes, cryptic reminders scrawled in his hand. I tapped a line at random. "Not all who seek the light deserve it." "Do you think he meant us?" I asked quietly. Lark paled. "Of course not. He loved us." "Did he—" I let the words hang, measured, intentional. "Or did he see what we became, Portia hiding debts behind polished press releases, you selling illusions of green futures that weren't real? Maybe he left me the lighthouse because he knew I wouldn't trade it for applause." Portia bristled, but her voice cracked. "If you're implying we didn't care for him—" "I'm not implying," I interrupted softly. I'm asking, did you? The room went still. The only sound was the hiss of the old radiator. Lark's eyes filled, but she didn't speak. Portia looked away, jaw tight. I closed the notebook slowly. If Father left something else here, something greater than any inheritance, why should I believe you wouldn't twist it the same way you twisted what you already had? Neither answered. Their silence was louder than denial. I leaned back, letting the weight of the moment press on them. This was my test, not of what they wanted, but of what they regretted. And in their silence, I began to see which sister still carried the storm inside her. The call came at 2 in the morning. I almost didn't answer, but Portia's name flashed across the screen, and something in me knew it wasn't business as usual. Her voice was wrecked, shredded by tears I'd never heard from her before. "Nia, I'm sorry, I didn't know who else to call." I sat upright in bed. "What happened?" "They're foreclosing," she choked. "The company headquarters, tomorrow. 20 years of work gone in a week. Clients pulling out, banks calling in loans, investors fleeing. It's all crumbling." She was gasping now, the edge of panic seizing her words. "David's leaving. He says he can't live with me watching everything burn. I think I'm having a heart attack." I threw on my coat, keys in hand. "Listen to me, breathe, I'm coming." 3 hours later, I stood in what remained of Calder Holdings. Half-empty offices, boxes stacked to the ceiling, Portia hunched behind her desk like a ghost of the sister I once knew. Her perfectly pressed suits had given way to wrinkled linen, her hands trembling as she shuffled papers that meant nothing now. "I destroyed it all," she whispered. "Dad built something real, something lasting, and I killed it in 6 months." I walked closer, my own voice steady. "Did you kill it, or did you inherit something Father designed to fall apart?" Her head snapped up. "What do you mean?" This was the moment, the line between cruelty and revelation. I met her eyes, letting her see both my anger and my pity. "Portia, he left you illusions. He left me the truth." She crumpled then, burying her face in her hands. "Please, Nia, help me. I don't care about the empire anymore. I need a way back." For the first time in years, Portia wasn't asking for money. She was asking for salvation. The office smelled of dust and stale coffee, the once pristine glass walls now streaked with fingerprints and failure. Portia sat across from me, her eyes swollen, makeup smeared like war paint abandoned in retreat. I placed Father's leather-bound notebook on the desk between us, her gaze locked on it as though it might contain the absolution she craved. "This isn't a bailout," I said softly. "I'm not here to hand you back an empire, but Father didn't leave you with nothing." She flinched. "He left me ruin." "Not exactly." I opened the notebook to a page of title charts and market figures. Beneath them, Father's scrawl read, "The illusion was never the value. The current beneath it carries the power." Portia frowned, tracing the ink with shaking fingers. "What does that even mean?" I slid a slim envelope from my coat pocket, one of the smaller caches from the Fresnel vault. Inside was a certificate, a modest share in the Blue Ledger network, nothing compared to what else I held. Enough to spark hope, not enough to grant control. "Father trusted me with this," I said. "I think he wanted me to decide if you'd ever be ready to see it." Her breath caught as she unfolded the paper, reading the embossed seals, the signatures. "This is real." "Real," I confirmed. "But limited. A foothold, not a kingdom. What you do with it will tell me everything." Tears welled again, but this time they weren't just grief. They were humility, raw and foreign on Portia's proud face. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. "Maybe not yet," I said, closing the notebook. "But Father believed people can change. So do I. Now show me he was right." 2 weeks later, the call came not in the dead of night, but in the raw light of afternoon. Samantha's voice was ragged, stripped of its usual polish. "Nia, they threw me out. My apartment gone. I'm in the back of my car with half my clothes in garbage bags." I closed my eyes, picturing the youngest Calder sister who once bragged about penthouses and private chefs. now reduced to a shivering figure in a Honda Civic parked outside a strip mall. "Come to the Lighthouse," I said quietly. "We'll figure it out." When she arrived, her fury entered the room before she did. Samantha stormed into the keeper's quarters, eyes blazing, hair tangled, fists clenched. She dropped a duffel bag on the floor with a thud that shook the lantern glass. "You let me suffer," she snapped. "You knew, didn't you?" I stayed seated, steady. "Knew what?" "That father left you something more than a pile of rust. You had money while I was sleeping in my car." Her voice cracked into a scream. "Do you know what that feels like? Do you know what 5 years in hospital chairs feels like?" I shot back, sharper than I intended. The silence that followed was electric. Portia would have crumbled under it. Samantha only grew more furious. "This isn't justice, Nia. This is revenge dressed up as destiny." Tears streaked her cheeks, but her anger burned hotter. "If you think I'll beg like Portia, you're wrong." I stood then, slowly. "I don't need you to beg. I need you to see. Father gave me light, not a weapon. What you choose to do with the darkness, that's on you." Her answer was a slammed door and the sound of her car engine revving into the storm. Samantha's taillights vanished down the cliff road, swallowed by the mist. The silence she left behind was heavier than her rage, heavier than all the storms that had battered this coast. Portia and I stood together on the deck, the sea churning below. For once, she didn't reach for her phone, her briefcase, or an excuse. She simply whispered, "Maybe we've lost her for good." I wanted to believe otherwise, but Father's words lingered in my mind. Not all who seek the light deserve it, at least not yet. So Portia and I turned to what we could build. The Fresnel vault still held more than either of us could have imagined: currents data, carbon credits, contracts that universities and governments were already begging to access. But instead of funneling it back into hollow empires, we chose something different. It began with a draft on the back of Father's notebook, a floor plan for classrooms inside the Lighthouse's lower levels. Portia sketched out expansions with surprising tenderness, her once rigid hand flowing as if freed from decades of corporate armor. "We could teach kids here," she said. "STEM, navigation, ocean science, everything Father loved." Within months, Winter's Point was alive with hammering and paint. Local fishermen donated lumber. Retired teachers offered to volunteer. The storm that had nearly destroyed us had turned the community toward us. When the doors opened, the plaque read, "The Calder Academy of Light." Children from the coast ran up the spiral stairs, eyes wide at the old prisms now gleaming with LED brilliance. Portia watched them, tears slipping unashamed down her cheeks. "For the first time in my life, Nia, I'm building something real." I looked at the beacon turning above us, sweeping across the sea. Father's plan wasn't about inheritance. It was about illumination. It was nearly a year later when I saw her again. I had just finished locking the academy's doors after evening classes when headlights cut across the gravel road. A small car rolled to a stop, coughing smoke. Samantha stepped out. She looked thinner, older, her fire dampened, but her eyes, those same defiant eyes, still burned. The children's laughter drifted faintly from the dormitories below. She listened to it for a long moment before speaking. "I've been watching," she said quietly. "The academy, the kids, what you and Portia built, it's beautiful." Portia emerged from the lighthouse carrying blueprints. When she saw Samantha, she froze, then crossed the distance in 3 strides. For a heartbeat, I thought they'd clash again. Instead, Portia wrapped her arms around her little sister, tears spilling freely. Samantha's voice broke. "I was angry because I thought you left me in the dark, Nia. But the truth is I wasn't ready for the light." I placed Father's notebook in her hands. She turned the pages slowly until she found the last letter, the one addressed to all 3 of us. "The money was never the gift. The gift is the family you choose to be. Build together or not at all." For the first time in years, the three Calder sisters stood shoulder to shoulder, not rivals, not fractured heirs, but something closer to what Father had dreamed. That night, we lit the beacon together. Its beams swept across the Pacific, guiding ships through the dark. Below us, the academy windows glowed, filled with the laughter of children who would carry this legacy farther than we ever could. And in that light, I finally understood. Father hadn't left us wealth. He had left us back to each other.